Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our session on biologicals here at the DuPont Summit. I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Roberts, and I'm the CEO of something called the Agriculture and Food Systems Institute. And we have the great pleasure of being co-organizers for this session, together with support from the Biological Products Industry Alliance and the Biotechnology Industry Organization. We're very happy to have this opportunity to spend some time with you here at the DuPont Summit, and I want to thank the organizers for allowing us to host this session. I'm joined by four panelists, including our keynote speaker, Terry Stone, who I'll introduce in a moment. And our intention today is to have a conversation about the burgeoning industry and developments in biologicals for use in agriculture. So we're going to be limiting our discussion to biologicals that are intended for use in agriculture. But beyond that, that still gives us a range of biological products to talk about. So before I introduce Terry, I just am obligated to share a little bit of information about the Agriculture and Food Systems Institute. We are a not-for-profit scientific organization based in Washington, D.C., and we have a mission to advance science for public benefit. And this includes, and especially, science for ensuring safe and sustainable agri-food, health, and environmental systems. So as part of that, we operate by convening scientists for applied research, for capacity building, education, outreach, and the maintenance of information resources to support the use of science to achieve those goals. So we host a lot of activities like this one, where we bring scientists together to talk about issues that are relevant for current affairs in biotechnology and agriculture, and in particular, where the innovation intersects with regulation and public policy. So hopefully, that's what we'll be accomplishing this evening. Forgive me, I know a lot of you are in the United States. I am in Asia, so for me, it's evening. So if I say evening, that's my time zone. But I also mean good morning to you as well. So I think I will end my welcome there. We'll get back to the introduction of our panelists when it comes time to start the panel session. But I'm going to turn it over now to Terry Stone, and I'll just give a brief introduction, Terry, and then you can add any flavor that I've left out for your introduction. So Terry joins us as a recognized expert in the field of biologicals and in the agribusiness industry. He spent many years working for a variety of organizations, including Monsanto, Scotts, Syngenta, Agranos, and most recently with Corteva Agrisciences. And he is now the chairman of the board for the Biological Products Industry Alliance. So he's been very, very helpful as a knowledge resource to us at the Agriculture and Food Systems Institute. And we're very pleased that he's agreed to provide the keynote address for this session. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Andrew. Truly appreciate it and truly appreciate the opportunity to be able to present to this distinguished group of individuals and participate with them on the panel discussion as well. And there's no flavor to add to that, Andrew. That was a pretty sweet introduction, so thank you. So I'm going to talk about the landscape of plant biologicals, products, and their regulations. And the regulation part of it is really more of an introduction to the panel itself. So with that, I'm assuming everybody can see my screen, and we'll go from here. So first, I want to introduce the Biological Products Industry Alliance. We are the North American Trade Association focused solely on biological products, which include biopesticides, biostimulants, and biofertilizers. You know, we started in 2003. There were just 5 companies at that time. And membership now in 2025, our expectation is that we will exceed 170 companies. What's nice about this organization, among many things, is that it covers manufacturers, marketers, distributors, service providers, all the way through the channel of development, as well as commodity organizations or grower organizations. Our goal is really to advocate for the industry, for on the Hill with federal and with federal legislators, regulators such as EPA, and Vipka is representing them today from EPA, but with EPA, USDA, FDA is needed, but also at the state level, where these products are also required to be registered. We advocate really for sound science-based regulatory requirements, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. As a process, or part of that process, education is absolutely critical. A lot of people don't, especially in government, don't necessarily have a firm grounding on what biological products are and their benefits, what they're really used for, their safety, etc. So our goal is to really help educate them. And that also includes growers and others within the community of stakeholders interested in biological products. We do that through a lot of communication opportunities, workshops, webinars that we hold on a monthly basis, and press releases, other types of information that can be found on our website at www.bpia.org. And lastly, collaboration. Collaboration is so critical. It takes a village. It's not just one industry association trying to move things forward or one company. It's really a combination of organizations, stakeholders, whether it's growers, environmental groups, other non-governmental organizations, grower, commodity organizations, all working together along with academicians and others to be able to really help people understand the benefits of these products, how best to use them, where to use them, and what to expect from their use. So as you might, if you're not familiar with biologicals, they typically raise a lot of questions. And in particular, well, first of all, what are they? And are they only for pest control? Or are there other forms of biologicals that may be useful, such as a biostimulant or a biofertilizer? For growers, do they really work? Or am I paying for something that's really adding value or increasing my, or providing me with a return on investment that makes it worthwhile? And how has public pressure really influenced the adoption of these kinds of products? And then on the regulatory side, are they all regulated the same way? Do they take less time or cost less to bring to the marketplace? And how do they shape our business if I'm a company trying to determine how best to use these products, or even a food company trying to instill regenerative agricultural practices, looking for products that could very well fit into those kinds of systems? So I hope to answer some of those questions and hopefully expand more upon that with the panel discussion. So first, let's get some grounding on what biological products are. Dunham & Trimmer are one of the foremost market research companies in working in this biological space. They've come up with a system, or I should say an explanation of what these products are that is pretty widely recognized. And if you've ever been to a biological conference, you probably have seen this. But for those who haven't, I think it's great as an overall grounding. So they're really broken out into 2 major types: biocontrols and biostimulants. On the biocontrol side, you have macroorganisms like ladybird beetles that feed on aphids and are often used to be able to control those pests in agriculture. They make up a small portion of the overall biological product industry, however. The biopesticides, much more significant side, and frankly been in use for a very long time, are representative of products that are derived from natural materials, such as plants, bacteria, certain minerals. Think of citric acid and others that are really targeted for pest control. So that would be for insects, diseases, or weeds, perhaps even for altering the structure of the plant itself, such as plant growth regulators, or pheromones that may be used to disrupt the mating of moths, preventing them to mate and lay eggs. They're typically broken out into biochemicals, which would include plant extracts. Neem oil, for example, is one, or neem is zideractin, very commonly used and present in most countries. Organic acids, again, citric acid, for example, or some of the soaps that are used in organic production or by homeowners. Plant growth regulators, auxins, gibberellins, and semiochemicals or pheromones. On the microbial side, just about any microorganism can really be a source of a pesticidal trait. Think that microorganisms need to compete in their environment and consequently may produce metabolites or have other mechanisms to be able to displace bacteria from a disease standpoint or control insects, to be able to spread their offspring. Think of Bacillus thuringiensis, which has been around for since the beginning of the 19th or 20th century. Protozoa, yeasts, fungi, viruses are all in that group. And then you move over to the biostimulant area, which is really broken out into microbials and non-microbials. Yep, similar to biopesticides. But biostimulants are unique because they are not intended to control a pest. They are really intended to provide certain benefits, such as mitigating abiotic stress, enhancing overall crop quality, improving nutrient uptake or utilization by the plant itself. And they do this without the presence or the level of a nitrogen or a phosphorus that may be in the plant itself or maybe in the product itself. They're broken out into biofertilizers, which are really more nutrient enhancers, nitrogen fixing bacteria, for example, or maybe phosphate solubilizing products that produce acids, organic acids that help to break down those nutrients in the soil, making them available to the plant. And there's others that are really more intended for plant growth promotion or plant resilience, abiotic stress tolerance. These can come from any of the same microbial categories that I mentioned earlier. Non-microbials would include things like plant and seaweed extracts, fulvic acids, humic and fulvic acids that have been around for millennia to be able, that have been used for plant production or crop production. Organic acids, amino acids that can provide, again, resilience to stress tolerance and other protective qualities. Inorganic compounds as well can be included, although typically they are really more in the general fertilizer space itself. So how has the market changed over the years, and why is this really attractive to industry, and why there's been so much investment in this space and continued growth? Well, back in 2019, the overall biological market was a little less than $10 billion, with most of that really taken up by biocontrol and a smaller amount by biostimulants and biofertilizers. In 2023, that market expanded to about almost $13 billion. And by 2025 or 2027, rather, it's expected to exceed or come very close to $20 billion. And that market will be broken out into the biocontrols, which is about 10 billion of that. And when you combine the biostimulants and biofertilizers, it's about another $10 billion. So what are some of the trends, societal trends, that are really influencing this growth in this industry and the adoption of these products? Well, it's not surprising, begins and oftentimes with consumers and the demand for food. We all know how much population growth is going to continue through 2050, the end of the century. I won't give you a figure because it seems to change a bit, but basically it's continuing to increase at a relatively rapid rate. That results in increased food needs, a demand for more food, a demand for more meat, which increases the need for more feed crops, such as corn and soybeans. But ultimately, it results in an increase in crop production. And that increase in crop production is really coming from a limitation in resources, whether it's land, soil, healthy soils that can be used to grow these crops, nutrients. Phosphorus is really being depleted. Nitrogen, major sources really coming from manufactured nitrogen, which requires a great deal of fossil fuels and other energy to be able to use in crop production or on a particular crop. All of that increases production costs, making it more expensive to be able to produce food. But then there are other factors that really play into this in a very significant way. Climate change, abiotic stresses. 50% of yield loss is due at least to abiotic stressors such as drought, flood, frost, and a variety of others that really make it very challenging for growers to be able to continue to produce and look for alternatives or other products to be able to help them manage those abiotic stresses. And of course, this is all based on limited resource quality. Think about how water in California, in the Sacramento, Salinas valleys, that because of the deeper welling that is required to reach water is becoming more saline. Erosion and just the overall quality of the soil is due to continued production using the same production techniques that have been used for generations. So many different impacts that are really creating challenges on the environment and the social and public costs that are related to that. And of course, the consequential threat on sustainability for our subsequent generations to be able to have the same quality of life and access to good quality food. So those are some of the social aspects, and then which also lead into the market drivers, why companies are really interested in these products and which are driving more of their interest. Consumer concerns about where their food is coming from, who's growing it, what field was it actually produced in, what products were applied to it. That has led to a secondary market for standards, certifications, whether it be organic, sustainable, gluten-free, a variety of things that have resulted in a market or marketplace requirements by companies to also understand how the products that they're putting on their shelves have been grown. In Europe, residue levels for pesticides that are being placed on produce far exceed those that are required from and have been determined to be safe by regulatory and science experts, all to be able to meet perceived risk that consumers have about their food. all which is really leading to less chemical input or less availability for interest even for chemical pesticides to be used in the marketplace or to be used by growers. Companies are feeling this, recognizing that there is a need for additional opportunities. Governments recognize this as well, and there's a great deal of support for biological products. Governments do this through regulation, whether making it more challenging, more stringent to bring traditional chemistry products to the market, which increases their cost in getting through not only the development cycle, but the registration cycle, and creates barriers to entry for other companies to be able to enter that marketplace. Regulators also do this by developing or requiring data and information to support the registration and safety of these products, to be able to recognize that some products, biologicals in general, because they're naturally derived, although that's not a substitute for safety in any way, but because they are more familiar, it's possible to be able to require data or information studies that are typically very costly, but may not be necessary for these kinds of products. That leads to promotion and support as well. Policies that are put into place to be able to accelerate or encourage the production and registration of these kinds of biological products. EPA, I believe, has gone through as one of the early entrants in this area by establishing the Biologicals and Pollution Prevention Division, specifically as one of their mandates to review and approve biological products. And the data requirements, similar, but are not the same as those required for synthetic chemistry. All of this to also increase the use by farmers, whether it's subsidies or carbon credits that may be developed, or companies that are continuing to influence the adoption of products such as ADM with their regenerative agricultural program, and other food companies that encourages the use of biological products and may perhaps provide them with extra incentive to adopt them. So a number of reasons, a number of ways that biologicals have been very important, all leading to how do we get them to the marketplace themselves. And regulatory is the last step. Having worked in the regulatory area for almost 40 years, I can tell you it can be a stress point for a lot of companies, and it's a challenge to be able to be that last step prior to commercialization and getting a return on investment for all of the research and regulatory work that's been done, development work. So regulatory characteristics, which I'll go through, and we'll talk about this in more detail in a few minutes with the panel, differ between synthetic pesticides, biopesticides, and biostimulants and biofertilizers. Let's look at the synthetics and biopesticides first. The regulatory frameworks for these products are very well established to the most part, mostly harmonized throughout the world. There are organizations for such as WHO, OECD, FAO, that have worked to be able to identify or establish data and information requirements for these kinds of products. There's also the regulators themselves that not only participate in these international organizations, but also work together in many respects to be able to discuss the needs for ensuring the safety of these products and bringing them on the market. As a result, the requirements and the process has been pretty well harmonized. All countries require a product, a biopesticide or a synthetic pesticide, to have gone through that significant review prior to their ability to market them. The amount of time after submitting, not including the time for development and developing the data to support these products, can vary significantly. 4 to 10 plus years for synthetic pesticides. A lot of this is really the higher side is really what we're experiencing in the European Union now, where it's taking over 10 years in many respects to be able to bring a new pesticide to the market. Biopesticides, less time. In Brazil, which has been very favorable and policy-wise in establishing ways to be able to bring biologicals to the market, takes about a year to bring a new biopesticide through. However, in Europe, again, in some other countries, it's taking over 6 years. In the US, which Vibeke can speak to a little bit later, it's taking about 3 to 4 years, perhaps less as they're able to continue to work through the process, but still taking a bit more time than Brazil. The cost for registration can be very substantial. I'm going to bring in the biostimulants and biofertilizers here at this point, because as well as on the registration time, because these things really impact part of the reason why these products have really gained, popularity isn't quite the right word, but focus for a lot of companies when you think about the opportunity to get a return on investment. So biostimulants and biofertilizers, let's say that because this varies a great deal and obviously changes from year to year, biostimulants and biofertilizers may take anywhere from $0.5 to $5 million, maybe up to $10 million to be able to bring to the marketplace. A lot of this depends on the countries and how large of a launch that they want for the product. Biopesticides really take about 5 to 10 times as much. So based on a $5 million level, you're talking about 25 to 50 million. And synthetic pesticides, however, are really more in that $500 million to even more market, even more level to be able to bring through the registration process. CropLife International just recently published a document that was based on 2019 figures that placed the registration costs for synthetic pesticides at about 375 million. And for biopesticides at that time, a little bit to be about 35 million. So that was 2019, thinking about how inflation and other costs of raw materials and other things have increased. Those numbers undoubtedly have increased significantly. On efficacy data. Efficacy data is one of the most expensive aspects of being able to bring a product to the market, especially when it's linked to residue data or how long a pesticide may stay on the plant or on the produce itself. Efficacy data can be very country specific and very product specific, but from a human environmental safety standpoint, these requirements are necessary for registration for synthetics, biopesticides. But as I said earlier, with familiarity, some of that data may not necessarily be required because of, again, the familiarity that the regulator may have with the product. For biostimulants and biofertilizers, because they've been typically registered under fertilizer laws, the data and information required may include efficacy, certainly, but also focus more on composition of the product itself, guaranteeing that the ingredients are in fact present, or the level of nitrogen or phosphorus that the company is claiming is actually there, or that there's a lack of heavy metals that could have environmental or, of course, human concern, but not to the extent that that data and information is required for synthetic pesticides and biopesticides. Import tolerances, which is very important and actually a huge benefit of the biological products, is that tolerances, residue limits, are required for synthetic pesticides unless they're able to obtain an exemption from the requirement of a tolerance. Biopesticides typically do not have any import tolerance or residue limit requirements. Either those have been achieved through an exemption from the requirement of a tolerance, or countries have not required those, at least to date. As technology continues to advance, that may very well change over time, and there may be products that do require that. But for biostimulants and biofertilizers, there are none. Again, giving another reason for companies to consider developing these products. So to recap, and looking forward to additional conversation and questions, biological products, their definitions: biopesticides, products derived from natural materials, microorganisms, plants that are used and intended to control pests. Biostimulants, biofertilizers, they're substances that enhance plant growth, yield, or resilience without directly acting as nutrients. And when biofertilizers really focused on living microorganisms that improve nutrient availability. Market opportunities are growing significantly. In 2023, close to $13 billion in value, with an expectation to be 20 billion, if not greater, by 2027. And a lot of this focus is really because of an integrated biological chemical solutions approach that is really reshaping the industry. Think going from focus on biotic stress, pest management, integrated pest management, to one that is really focused more on the use of biologicals to also improve plant health and nutrient utilization, making it more of an integrated crop management approach. And then the regulatory and market dynamics. Regulatory frameworks will always evolve, more stable for biopesticides, but continuing to evolve for biostimulants and biofertilizers. And again, this market growth driven by sustainability goals, consumer preference, regulatory preference itself, and demand for greater integration of solutions of all kinds. So I've included a few links in the presentation that will be available that you could certainly check out that you might find useful. And with that, thank you, and be happy to answer any questions. And of course, lead into the panel discussion with our other experts to be able to further the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Terry. Really fantastic overview. Couldn't have asked for anything better than that. So I have a couple of questions that I've prepared. We have at least one question in the Q&A box. I see another question in the general comments section. So what I'm going to do is we've got another 5 or so minutes in our schedule, although the schedule's here to serve us, not the other way around. But I want to just ask you a couple of follow-ups, and in particular from the question and answer box, just to let people know we're taking that seriously. So one of the attendees asks specifically about Europe, but I think this applies everywhere. In your view, how can the registration times be reduced? When you look at different places where the registration times are shorter, what is allowing them to have shorter registration times? And are there things in your view that could be done in some of these jurisdictions that have longer registration times to reduce that time?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I'm sure my fellow panelists will have a view of this as well. I think from what I've seen, frankly, is it's a combination of factors. On the one hand, you have policy, regulatory policy, legislative policy, such as in Brazil, that is really focused on this area for many reasons, because of increases in pesticide resistance, requiring alternatives to be able to control pests, or new pests that have arrived where there just aren't chemical solutions that may be very effective. In Brazil, they really spent a lot of focus, a lot of political capital to develop policies that help to ensure adequate funding of regulators, their academic institutions, to be able to review and approve biologicals in a shorter time frame. Hasn't really hasn't impacted their safety or the efficacy of the products that are brought onto the market, but it has encouraged and shortened the timelines. Along with the policy, it's been backed up by budget to be able to ensure that regulators have the resources to be able to review and approve these products, as well as the technical foundation, technical background to be able to address issues and questions using, sound and appropriate science. There's this whole area of plant soil interaction and microbial interaction as a result is just growing at a tremendous rate. And having that understanding helps to be able to make reasonable decisions on the safety of products. In using the US as an example, fabulous that we have the biologicals or the biopesticide and pollution prevention division, totally dedicated in part, of course, to biopesticides. There are other aspects that they review as well. Very reasonable, very solid data requirements for biopesticides. However, their challenges are more on resources, resource constraints, budget reductions, headcount reductions that have resulted in taking more time, lawsuits, products that have been, or the agency being sued for different reasons, such as meeting Endangered Species Act requirements, all of which pull resources away potentially from the review of products. But basically, it's more of a resource issue rather than other aspects. And then you have countries or regions like the European Union that have a very, very rigid hazard-based precautionary type principle that results in many different, basically results in biological products being reviewed very similar to synthetics, with very similar kinds of questions being asked that aren't necessarily relevant, that really increases the overall review time for these products and frankly, the cost. So it's a combination of different things. And I think you have to also appreciate that regulators have a job to do. Regulators are held accountable to their laws and the regulations, and they're required to uphold those and be able to perform the review according to what those requirements are, regardless of whether they may be necessarily scientifically appropriate or not. But that creates challenge for them as well. So it's an interesting combination of things. Bottom line, I'd love to see good science-based, appropriate data and regulatory requirements for these products. I'd also love to see greater funding available in companies or in countries to be able to support these. And quite honestly, it's also incumbent upon the companies developing these products to ensure what they're submitting for review is meeting the data requirements of the country and is appropriate for that purpose, because there are also delays that are associated with inadequate submissions and dossiers, data that has been submitted, all of which can contribute to delays in overall approval.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Terry. A lot in that subject and a lot in your answer. So, combination of resources, a combination. I think people, when we think of resources, we think of money a lot, but it's really human time and energy, right? That goes into not just conducting the reviews, but preparing for them, being able to ensure that the framework makes sense for the products that are being reviewed and is being applied in a sensible way. And that just requires people to have the freedom to devote real time to considering those issues. And it's challenging in a world with tight budgets and busy staff for everyone everywhere. It can be very challenging to accomplish those things, even though everybody agrees that uh, it's worth devoting that time. So I'm going to hit you with one more question, and then we'll open things up and introduce our other panelists and broaden the discussion a little bit. My longtime friend and colleague, Pete Vandermeer, has asked, first of all, complimented you on your very nice presentation, but he wants to know how much thought you or maybe Dunham Trimmer have put into looking at the relevant international agreements, treaties, organizations, standard setting bodies that intersect with biologicals, and if there are resources available that you can direct people to.
Well, that's a good question. I'll be honest with you, it's a little bit out of my scope. I think one of my colleagues, Natasha Dixon, could probably talk to that in greater detail. But I would say that industry associations, such as BPIA, the Fertilizer Institute, Crop Life International, the European Biostimulant Industry Council, a variety, all participate in organizations such as OECD. We support those efforts and look for opportunities to provide information to support science-based regulatory policy for these kinds of products. So we participate. It's a challenge. It's a challenge because individual companies cannot necessarily participate on behalf of their company in those kinds of fora. It really is not necessarily viewed in a positive way. So company representatives really work through industry associations, academics, to be able to deliver those messages and to be able to support their claims and the like. So it requires, as I said earlier, a village, to use Secretary Clinton's, euphemism or whatever, that, yeah, it takes all these different groups to really participate. And again, a lot of it comes down to funding and time to be able to participate and really be able to make a difference.
Thanks a lot, Terry. So stick around. Terry's has agreed to persist on our panel. But what I'd like to do now is ask the other three panelists to turn on their cameras. And I'm just going to invite you really quickly to introduce yourselves. And I'm going to go in first. Well, I'll go in last name alphabetical order because that's how you are left to right on my screen. So we'll ask you to start, Natasha, and then go to you, Jane, and finish up with you, Vika.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Natasha Dixon, and I handle global regulatory policy for the biologics portfolio within Bayer. Been with Bayer 14 years, 13 years rather now, going on 14 years next year. And I look forward to interacting with your questions for the panel today.
Great. Good morning, and thanks to the DuPont Summit for holding this event. My name is Jane Fife. I'm currently Chief Technical Officer at 3Bar Bio, a company, contract development manufacturing company that supports the biologicals industry. I'm an agricultural and biological engineer by training, and have been in the industry about 20 years at 3Bar, and then previous to that at Battelle Memorial Institute.
Hello, my name is Yuka Striegel. I'm a senior scientist with the Office of Pesticides. Specifically, I'm in the Biopesticides and Pollution Prevention Division in the Emerging Technologies branch. I focus there on the product characterization and human health evaluation of the products that we see, which are genetically engineered mosquitoes to plant-incorporated protectants to microbes. I'm excited to be here and to answer questions the best as I can and give an overview of the regulations that we are working under.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to all of you. And again, thanks for joining us for the event. So for the sake of the participants, we're going to divide the panel discussion roughly into three categories. I have a few prepared questions for the panelists that are related to research and development, to regulation, and then a little bit on consumer perception and sort of the marketplace for biologicals. And what I will be doing, if I can coordinate myself well enough, is bouncing between our prepared questions and then any questions from the audience and trying to integrate those in where it's appropriate for the program. So I'm not always the best multitasker, but I promise you I am not ignoring your questions in the question box, and I will do my best to get to as many of them as I can. So I'm going to start off just by asking a couple general questions, and these first few will be focused on research and development. So it's primarily directed to Natasha, Jane, and Terry. So one of the things that Terry laid out, and that basically anyone in the agricultural space has to lay out at the beginning of any talk on innovation, is the challenge of producing adequate food. And the rising global population, the fact that they're not making land anymore, as it turns out, you have to work in the constraints that you've got. And there's a lot of enthusiasm about biologicals and their role in contributing to improving productivity, sort of bridging the gap between where we are right now and where we want to be. So the simplified question for each of you is, what are the types of products in the biological space that you are most excited to see, either in use at this point or coming down the pike? And I'll do it in order. Natasha, and then Jane, and then we'll come back to Terry.
Well, I was going to say I'll take the first stab because I'm super excited about this topic. But one of the innovations I feel like will be critical for the success of biological products moving forward is the use of modified microorganisms to produce in-use products that regulators are already comfortable with. So what I mean by that is products using modified microorganisms to increase specificity, even more than now, efficacy to produce in-use products such as seed treatments, foliar sprays, and in furrow and soil drenches. And I wanted to just bring up the product types because the benefits of using modified microorganisms to get these product types is that the regulators are familiar with this, right? We're not giving them anything new. The use patterns will be the same. So it shouldn't be any additional burden for regulators to review those types of products just made by modified microorganisms. And they can be used as for biocontrol products, as well as for products, as Terry mentioned, for biostimulants, biofertilizers, for abiotic stresses, for yield. So I think that it's exciting times for that. And I think that's the way we need to move our industry forward.
Thanks, Natasha. Yeah, certainly a lot of room there for tiny factories to produce things that we already are using. Over to you, Jane.
Sure. And I have kind of two different areas that I'm really excited about. And I think the first is what we're seeing is a lot of established products out there, but the ability to stack them or to put together multiple modes of action in combining maybe biocontrol and biostimulants. And we're seeing that all the way at the distributor level and kind of the creativity and the innovation happening there. And what gets very exciting is when we can combine that with unique delivery to enhance the performance of these types of products, and combine that with precision, what I would call traditional kind of precision ag mindset, where we can use equipment and data information to prescribe. We're not there yet, but there's interest certainly in getting there with biological products as we integrate them in with synthetics and so forth over time. And I think bringing ag tech and ag biotech together is very exciting. And the other area that I'm learning more about and I'm really excited about is the use of what I would say peptides and proteins in agriculture as potential replacements for some synthetic chemistry that's either being phased out or is just too expensive to develop. And what's exciting is this is technology that's been over in the pharmaceutical space in biologics products that have come on the market. And we're seeing now technologies really in an R&D phase being developed in agriculture. There's work to do in making them cost effective, but I think the innovation is coming and is very exciting.
Thanks, Jane. Over to you, Terry.
Yeah, not working for a manufacturer at this point in time, have an interesting perspective to be able to look at where the science is really going as well. What I am most intrigued by is the ecology between soil, microorganisms, and plants, and how they are in fact interacting at a very intimate level, communicating with each other, and signaling products that are starting to be developed, that microorganisms and plants really have co-evolved. And as a consequence of that, they have a way of communicating that is based on metabolites that are either produced by the microorganisms or by those produced in plants that are stimulating microorganisms to produce things that are necessary for the plant and vice versa. There are companies that are starting to really develop this technology, signaling products such as Yord Bioscience, for example, that is able to really develop bacterial consortia that can help with enhancing the overall efficiency of the existing microbial community. So seeing these kinds of products develop and learning more about the plant and soil microbiome and how they interact together, to me, is just fascinating. And I'm looking forward to seeing the kinds of technology develop from that.
Thanks, Terry. It's one of the things that you learn right away as you start to learn about the biological space. The soil is both a setting and a major character in this play. It fulfills a lot of roles. And obviously, as we understand more about it, there will be more opportunities there. So I'm gonna come back. I think we have time for maybe one or two more, but I'm gonna wing it a little bit and come back to some points that Natasha and Jane brought up. So Natasha, you mentioned seed treatments, and one of the things that I thought Terry laid out really nicely was sort of one axis of what the products themselves are. Are they organisms? Are they extracts? What are they looking at? And then functions. But one of the things that is also sort of an element here is what form do they take? Are these seed treatments? Are they sprays? Are they how do they get delivered to agriculture? So maybe just give us a little bit of perspective on what you see in the field. How are biologicals being formulated and delivered to improve agricultural productivity?
Sure, Andrew. So currently, if you look at most corn seed treatments that come out of the United States, they have some type of biological product on there. Most times people don't know that. So the widespread use of biologicals is more than we actually realize. So I would say beginning seed treatment is probably the number one delivery system currently for biological products. I think the second, and again, saying in my opinion, no concrete data, would be foliar sprays. Because we do have biological biopesticides, fungicides that have been active. Bayer has a product, Serenade, that's been on the market for over 25 years that is a biological fungicide. So I would say that will be the second most used delivery method. And then as Terry mentioned, I think the soil space will definitely increase. I read a figure not too long ago that there are over 5,000 different microorganisms in 1 gram of soil, right? So this the potential to tap into that will be amazing. And I think that will also be a soil drench and furrow will probably increase in population and as delivery methods moving forward because of that statistic.
Yeah, thanks for that. And of course, the others, anybody who wants to chime in, just interrupt me. But I wanted to also sort of hit a point that you brought up, Jane, that I had in my list of potential questions for Terry as well. You talked about your excitement around integrating biologicals with other conventional practices. And so, we often frame things, or things are framed for us as replacements, biologicals instead of synthetic chemicals. And I think those of us with a realistic worldview recognize that it's not an either or, it's a everything and as we need it. So as you look at the space, what are the sort of challenges and opportunities in terms of integrating biologicals into conventional practices?
Sure. You know, the Natasha did a good job talking about kind of different ways that you can get a biological there on the seed, making it easy for the farmer. So you do want what you do to integrate into what's already being done on the farm. Sometimes adding biological into a tank mix to spray, or either as a seed treatment or a liquid seed treatment, or a foliar spray, or even an in-furrow delivery. That's another mode for row crops where you can deliver a liquid or a dry product into the furrow as the seed's being planted, kind of just in time. But what you combine a biological with, particularly if it's a living organism, matters because you could be combining it with a chemistry that will basically kill the microorganism. So, you know, the chemistry compatibility, pH can be a great killer of microbes too if things get too acidic. So those are things you have to understand. I would say industry is doing a good job. I'm sure there's room for improvement, but a good job at letting end users know what their products are compatible with or not compatible with. But I think the big thing, particularly with living microorganisms, microbials, you know, I think farmers understand physical stability. If you mix something and it gunks up your spray nozzles, that's a bad day, right? But biological compatibility or stability is something that you can't see, right? So understanding that ahead of time is really important.
Yeah, thanks for that. I remember just from working in the laboratory, a lot of times as you move your clear liquids around, you don't realize that the biological entity that you're trying to study may be gone already before you even start your
Yeah.
assay. So it certainly hits home for me. Terry, before I move to our second topic on regulation, anything you want to add to either of those two questions before we go on?
No, I just want to say, Natasha and Jane did a wonderful job in laying that out. The one thing I would add is that, and this is where organizations like the Biological Products Industry Alliance and BIO and others really can play a very important role in working with stakeholders like academicians and others, commodity organizations, to help educate growers, not just on individual products, but on the same issues that Jane, for example, was really bringing up, to make sure that these products, they have knowledge about how these products should be applied, when they should be applied, what to expect from using the products. So these are all areas that require, I think, better communication, better training, better education, and hopefully that will also help with stimulating adoption.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Nobody's going anywhere, but we're going to shift to topic number 2, which is regulation, in part because I want to give Vibeke a chance to speak. She's been sitting patiently. She joins us as the only regulator on the panel, so we're not going to overburden her by asking her all of the regulatory questions. But I thought, Vibeke, we could start out by just asking you to explain a little bit about how EPA regulates biologicals, what biologicals do you regulate, and what are you looking at when you're regulating biological products?
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I'll give my best to give a high-level overview, and then I'm happy to field any questions that might go into more detail. If we think about the regulation of biologics, we really have to think about 2 groups within the EPA that regulate these products. One group is the biopesticides group, which evaluates biopesticides in the Office of Pesticide Programs. And then there are biologicals that are not pesticides, such as those that are used as biofertilizers or algae for biofuels production. And those are regulated within the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. And each of these 2 groups within EPA derives their authority from their and protection goals from their own set of statutes. So I want to make that clear upfront and also kind of set the structure of the regulatory system in people's minds. So I'm part of the biopesticides division, so that's what I'm going to primarily focus on. Biopesticides are regulated just like chemical pesticides under two statutes, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, FIFRA for short. And if they're proposed for uses on food or feed, they're also regulated under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, FFDCA. And so they're held to the same safety standards as any of the chemical pesticides that are being used. And so we're conducting human health and environmental assessments for all new biopesticide products that are proposed for uses. And they're also there needs to be a they're regulated for other FIFRA requirements, such as labeling. So the label is very similar in structure as to any chemical pesticides that you can buy on the market. But as Terry already very nicely laid out, generally these biopesticides have a lower toxicity profile. And so the data requirements that we do have for them they reflect that. There are specific ones, for example, for biochemicals and for microbial pesticides, but we also do more qualitative assessments rather than quantitative assessments when we compare them to chemical pesticides. So we often see scientific rationales in lieu of animal studies, which generally we're supporting. So if there's something that is derived from a microbe that is already present in the environment and there's a history of safe exposure, you may be able to use that as an argument in lieu of certain studies that you would otherwise need to be conducting. I also want to point out that for some of these more newer products, especially in the GE space, there are no data requirements per se. So what we then do in those instances, we see what data requirements we do have and then have to see what of these are applicable to this particular product. And then we see, okay, what novel questions do we need answered to come to a risk assessment conclusion for this product? Are there any new data that need to be produced by the company or not? So there is definitely this element of data development that Terry also mentioned, especially in that space, which might take more time for the development and might then prolong, in some cases, the evaluation time. So that's really where the developers can help us, help them in producing background information and considerations so that we can base our assessment on these and don't have to come up with these new questions ourselves all. But, again, Terry's presentation has been great also to show that there is increased interest by developers, and Natasha and Jane have already mentioned that as well. And we do see that in our division as well. So over the last about 4 years, our division, which is about the 10th of the size of the overall Office of Pesticide Programs, has seen 80% of the new active ingredients compared to then the 20% of new chemical active ingredients. So there's a big interest in developing new active biopesticide ingredients. That doesn't mean that there is not a lot of activity going on in the chemical space, but this really has been a more recent shift towards biopesticides. So it's not only that we see more new active ingredients, but we also see a more diverse set of active ingredients and ways in which people would like to use them, sometimes out of the agricultural space. So one example is a recent product, which was the first RNA-based biopesticide for the use of Colorado potato beetle control. But we also see a shift from the main 4 genera that we usually see in the microbial pesticides space to a more diverse set of bacteria. And this is great in a way because, of course, we want to, as as the biopesticides division, we want to promote these types of uses and biopesticides, but it has increased the workload, and we're certainly trying to increase our efficiencies, but there's just a natural ceiling to what it is that we can do. So that has, is something that developers have experienced in and getting their registration decisions from us. So that is kind of the current state, but I also want to point out, since we're talking about the regulations in general, we need to kind of understand what we mean by pesticide, because that is a defined term in FIFRA. So what is the umbrella under which we're looking at these products? And there's really, a pesticide can be one of three things based on the FIFRA definitions. It can be something that is pest controlling, which is a mixture of substances intended for preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating a pest. So the thing that you would colloquially refer to as a pesticide. But it also captures plant growth regulators, which themselves have an extremely broad definition in FIFRA. Those could be substances that are promoting fruit ripening, phytohormones, for example, and also includes defoliants and desiccants. And the third category is any nitrogen stabilizers. In addition to this plant growth regulator term, one term that the industry has been using over several years is the term biostimulants. Biostimulants are not defined in FIFRA, and they also are not defined in EPA's regulations at this time. But if you're familiar, there's a draft farm bill that is currently out, and there is a proposed definition for biostimulants in there. And an associated exclusion from FIFRA for certain biostimulants that meet certain criteria, certain safety criteria. So that is maybe something that will be codified in the near future, but currently we don't have that definition. But EPA is aware that because of the broad definition, there's a lot of questions of, am I a plant growth regulator? And I think Bhavneet has already put into the chat a draft guidance document that EPA has put together. FIFRA is a claims-based statute, so it really depends on what you're marketing your product for, what claims you're making. And so that draft guidance document outlines which claims would be captured or would capture your product in our regulations.
Deepika, one of the things I was always jealous of when I was a regulator at USDA was that EPA has risk-benefit considerations in FIFRA. So just to briefly touch on whether and how much or how little efficacy evaluation you do, and does that sort of factor into any of the regulatory decision-making that goes on at EPA around biological products?
It does for certain products, and those that are used for products that are, or for the control of products that are for human health concerns. So if you have a mosquitocide or you have a cockroach pesticide, then we evaluate it because we want to make sure that people, when they use it, they know that it works, and because these are insects that could transmit diseases. Now, but on the other hand, we're not routinely doing efficacy evaluations for the other products, and that is something that I've heard from industry in the past, that one of the considerations or kind of things that people think about is how efficacious are biopesticides, and there's really no standard currently. So we have thought about integrating efficacy standards into our evaluations, and we're currently working through how this could be done with all the other things that we're doing. But we're recognizing this as something that could promote the use of biopesticides and kind of counteract this notion that these things are not efficacious and really we need only the chemicals. But no, they're really efficacious when you have integrated pest management. And so that is definitely something we're considering, and would hope for feedback from industry on that as well, and how they think this could be done.
Thanks a lot. A ton of information there. So I hope the participants are able to keep up maybe better than me. Fascinating to hear just about the volume of applications. It really suggests that there's tremendous interest in this area. So I promised it wouldn't just be us grilling you, Vibeke. So I'm going to kick a question to the other three panelists. Just briefly, what are the other regulatory agencies and organizations? Terry mentioned a few in his presentation, but in your work, what are the other regulators beyond EPA that you have interacted with, or that that are relevant to the kind of products that you've been working on?
So I would say USDA for sure, as well as state lead agencies. So registering pesticides do not stop with EPA. To have full commercialization, even with fertilizers, you have to have a state registered label. So many of us, in especially on this call, we don't only work with EPA, but we have to work with the different states to make sure the products are compliant for their regulations, and then can get into the farmer's hands.
I would add to that, when you're doing a lot of development work, permitting. So we spend a lot of time going back and forth with APHIS, USDA APHIS in permitting. So that's an important part of keeping our work moving forward, is having the right permits. And most of that deals with state to state transfer if we're doing field trials or things like that. Or as we work with partners, we're receiving material into our facility. So it's important to keep the permit flow going when you're doing that work.
Terry, anything you want to add there, or think we're good?
Well, I think it's good. Just keep in mind that every country has their own regulations and own requirements for permitting, for importation, and the like. So wherever you're working in the world, you need to be considering those as well.
Yeah.
Good point. So I'm going to go to a question from the chat box, and I'll throw it open to everybody, but I'll start with you, Vibeke, and then I'll move to the other panelists. So my summary of the question, and they can post it again if I've flubbed it completely. When you're looking at regulatory timeframes or the cost of regulation, looking at genetically modified or CRISPR modified, which I take to mean genome edited, biofertilizers, are these roughly the same as other biological products that are biofertilizers? Does it take longer? Does it take shorter? Is it still an open question? How is the policy shaking out on some of these newer, I hesitate to say new because they've been around for a while now, but newer genetic modification techniques?
Yeah, that's a great question. Biofertilizers wouldn't be looked at by the pesticides division, but I think that gets to a larger point of the novel versus the old, and especially if we look at CRISPR, I think there's a great there's a discussion here of what is like wild type like and what is truly novel. And so you can also think about it as well, if you're using CRISPR as something that is just as a mutagen, would that need any novel considerations? And so then really it depends on what it is that you want to engineer into your microbe. And that would then drive the risk assessment, both for the human health and the ecological part.
Yeah, right back to product, not process-based evaluation, right? All right. Anybody else want to take that up? Anybody have experience with genome edited organisms and how they think that influences the timeline for development and registration?
So I'm just going to make the comment. I don't think, as Vibeke laid out, especially in product types, again, a product over process, right? So we're used to certain product types. The way we get the product should not, in my opinion, require any additional time or additional regulatory burdens, because again, the product is something that regulators will be familiar with. For novel products, we understand that there will have to be a lot of communication with regulators, not just US regulators, but regulators globally to get adoption of these products. That's going to be a working process, as Terry mentioned. It won't be one company, it will be the industry that drives this in other regions. I do want to just compliment the US, because we know we all have struggles with regulatory bodies, but the US, especially EPA and BPPD, have really been technology friendly for developers. So kudos to you guys.
So I'll sort of follow up a little bit on that, because we've been touching on it a little. A lot of the questions, it depends, and it depends on the product that you're looking at. And so I guess my question to the three more developer sided or developer experienced panelists is, would you describe the regulatory outlook around the various biologicals and their categories as well developed, or is this a developing space? How much work do we need to do to help get clarity around where some of these products need to go, and what kind of timeline they're looking at, and what is the process for getting approvals and freedom to operate and all of those other things?
So I will start with this by saying it really depends on who you ask and where you ask, right? So Terry's laughing because he knows the struggles. I'm sure Jane does as well. If you ask us in the US, for our EPA side, we're well developed. It is a well-oiled machine. And I think part of that is because we have dedicated resources able to review these products. If you look at, as Jane mentioned, on the APHIS or BRS side of our US regulatory system, there is room for improvement. If you ask someone in Europe, as you got the question earlier, asking how can we, reduce timelines, they do have now dedicated test guidelines for microbial products, but that still is under their chemical regulation. So the timelines, and I do not know if the timelines, if the new regulations are there for dedicated resources. I think that's the thread. If you ask any region, is the dedicated resources available for these products. If you go to Africa, for instance, they are emerging, right? They are in some countries that have fully developed regulations, and then there's other countries that are looking for guidance, and where our industry associations, as in CropLife, as in other international organizations, OECD, can help guide them on science-based regulations. So it really depends on who and where you ask.
Thanks, Natasha. Jane, Terry, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Natasha did a great job. And it's funny. It depends is like the motto of regulatory. And in any company that you're working in, they know the first answer is going to be it depends, because it always is on a case-by-case basis. So bit of a challenge there. But isn't that the same with just about any area, really?
It seems to me it is, but I think biologicals are gifted also by having an incredible sort of breadth and depth of product categories too, right? Whenever you're talking about trying to cluster together things that could be ladybugs, or could be seaweed extracts, or could be genetically modified microbes, this is a broad range of potential things that form the biological product space. So probably even more, it depends, than in some other places.
Good point.
The only thing I would add, kind of I'm not a regulatory person, I'm a developer, but as a novice trying to figure it out and looking at definitely the Plant Biostimulant Act and what we're waiting on, and the EPA draft guidance, you get into those documents and just having some more specifics around, there's claims information in there that but there's a lot of gray areas still. So I think as we move forward, continuing to be able to minimize the gray areas so that as a developer, we really can understand how we move a product forward and what we need to do. That would be my ask.
A great segue, because I want to come back to you, Vika, and ask you. Recently, the Unified Website for Biotechnology in the US announced a tool that was jointly developed by EPA, FDA, and USDA. And the purpose is to provide some guidance on federal regulations around genetically modified microbes. So it's essentially a flow chart. You go, you ask some questions, and you answer them about the nature of your product, and it gives you an idea of which agencies you should be interacting with and how. So can you give us a little bit of insight? I'm guessing the 80% of applications coming to EPA being biologicals helped in motivating the creation of a tool like that. But just give us a little bit of insight as to how the US regulators decided to get together and produce this.
Yeah, that's indeed a great segue. The regulation of biotechnology in the US is also very much an overlay of the three agencies, EPA, USDA, and FDA. So depending on what type of product you have, you may be regulated by none, by all three, or something in between. So that alone is already, especially for smaller developers, presents a big hurdle. And so we recognize in the feedback and the discussions that we have that especially in the microbials, GE microbial space, there is the need for clarity. And so that was the impetus, and it, juggling all the things that we have to do on a daily basis versus policy versus developing these things. We said, okay, GE microbes is something that we want to tackle as the three agencies. And so we've developed this tool, which is this current state. And I say this with a caveat because of the current, the very recently this week overturned rule from USDA. So if you go to the Unified website right now, you can still click through this tool, and there's a various questions that will be asked of a hypothetical product or a product that you already have, and that it should give you an output of who you should talk to. But the caveat with the recently overturned rule of USDA is we don't know what that currently means for them. But that's the output still should hold true for EPA. So that means the pesticides program as well as the toxics program and the FDA portion. But that was kind of the impetus. We want to make first say, okay, let's give a tool out there in addition for you to be able to send us emails at any time, right? And go into the Unified website. But that is not where we want to end up. We want to improve. I think we all recognize that the science is the science, and we're overlaying our regulations on top of the science. So there should be a core principle of how we evaluate products with those particular protection goals and regulations in mind. So we want to at some point find those that state and move towards it to streamline the regulations, remove duplication of reviews that are currently occurring in some instances, and move towards this. So this is really seen as one of the first steps in that direction, especially in the GE space.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think it's a really great tool. If I can understand it, and I'm not even a product developer, but it's easy to use, and it gives you some pertinent information that can be really helpful. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to move into some consumer perception, public sentiment oriented questions, in part because we have one in the chat box. But I just want to throw this general question out to start us off. So, anybody who works in agriculture or has worked in agriculture over the last 40 years recognizes that there's this increasing interest in kind of where our food comes from and what does it mean and what's happening to our food before it gets to our houses. But you also can readily observe that it's still a challenge to educate consumers around science and complicated scientific issues. If you didn't know that before 2020, it's hard to live through 2020 to 2022 and not think that it's challenging to provide useful, meaningful, and impactful education to the public on complex scientific topics. So the question is, where do biologicals fit in that? We've seen consumer backlash against innovative technologies. We've seen consumer backlash against longstanding technologies. So, you know, where are biologicals? How are they being received? And what are people interested in doing in terms of making sure that consumers are educated appropriately about the role of biologicals in agricultural production?
Oh,
Very simple, not challenging question.
I was gonna say, Jane, I'll let you speak your opinions first this time, and then I can come behind you, and Terry and I can back you up.
Uh-oh. Well, you know, I think biologicals just getting to a market, particularly row crop agriculture, it has taken a long time. And, you know, I still go to plenty of grower meetings, farmer meetings, and, you know, there's just more questions than answers, right? So the education piece just to our market, right, to use these products. But we are seeing a big shift in mindset, I think, in interest in the use of these products. And whether there's a customer pool coming in, I don't know. I know when I go to the grocery store, I am mindful of what I buy and how I want it produced. But there certainly has been a shift. That the use of biologicals, I think, Andrew, you said earlier, it's been going on for, you know, decades and decades. It's just been in different ways in different agricultural production systems. Controlled environment ag has been using biologicals for a long time. A lot of it's been the macroorganisms, and maybe some of the bio, and they're not really using biostimulants to the same degree that we're seeing row crop agriculture actually look to biostimulants and biofertilizers a little bit more than maybe biopesticides. So it gets more complicated depending on the production system. And also the education piece is so important because there is a want, but I think there's confusion. So we need to simplify it. And back to, there's so many different types of products. From a regulatory perspective, it's hard, but also from a market perspective, it's hard, right? And I think I'll leave it there. I laid the stage.
I think you're absolutely correct. First and foremost in my mind is education. We have to be really realistic on what these products can and cannot do.
Yeah.
If you go in and you say that these products are going to solve everything from climate change to everything by themselves at this current research state, no, right? We will have to use them in integrated crop management systems. That doesn't mean there aren't blockbuster products that can be used by themselves, but I think we also just need to right size expectations on the use of these products. And again, education to the regulators, education to the farmers, education to other smaller, mid to large size companies. We have to keep all of this together and really look at our audience. And I think, and I know Terry's really passionate about this point, and I'm going to say this and hand it off to him to complete it. We also have to realize that organic does not necessarily mean by all biological products. Biological products are not automatically organic. So that expectation for the consumer as well needs to be, you know, well stated and well understood. And I think as an industry, we do need to do a bit better on educating everyone about that topic.
Yeah, really well
Yeah,
said
thanks.
on both
Please
counts.
go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. I absolutely agree with what they said. I think there's another aspect that I would add to it too, is that the industry's evolved a great deal from mom and pop companies. You often hear it, well, we developed this in our garage or whatever. The industry has moved well beyond that. And it's really important that the quality of the products, and this goes along with the expectations about how to use them, when to use them, what to mix them with, etc., is really provided. But its quality becomes very, very important. So how can the industry also continue to elevate itself to make sure that the products that they're offering can really meet the claims that they're making for their use? And I think that also can help as well.
Yeah, thanks. I want to pull a question that it didn't make it to the Q&A box, but it is in the participants chat. I know sometimes people are typing in the wrong place. The question is basically looking at biologicals, are they more or less likely to be accepted by consumers in markets, including as organics? And I don't want to ask people what's going to qualify as organic because it's unfair. There's people who do that and they're not here on this panel. But I do think there's other elements in the question around uh, biological products for small production versus for large production. And it gets to the question of, are there biological products? Do you see biological products being marketed as consumer-facing products? Do you
Mm.
see them being marketed to a range of producers, be it whether they're small or large or medium? Uh, what How do you see the market developing in sort of the near term and the long term?
Mm.
That's a very loaded question, because if you go to Lowe's Home Improvement, for instance, just one of the
Mm.
Ah, man, I was really looking forward to what I could find at the Home and Garden Center.
yeah, you
Oh,
may find some there. There are some potassium salt AIs that are there. But I don't know if it's extensively marketed that, hey, this is a biological, because most people aren't necessarily reading the label. Those labels, as you mentioned, do have organic on them. So for consumers in that space, that's a key or a clue that it may be a biological product. So, but I think our industry, like I said, I'm interested to hear what Jane and Terry has to say. I, I don't know if we have done a really good job on communicating that. As Terry mentioned with the residues, a lot of times using these products at the end of cycle or end of life
Mm.
in these crop management programs will reduce residues. We know consumers are concerned about residues, but how we get that message.
Mm.
so it's not just me that's losing the feed from Natasha. That's
No.
everybody.
No, no.
Okay. I think we definitely got the first part, and I think we got the second part too, which is consumer concerns around residues or something that may well be addressed through use of biological products, or at least partly addressed through use of biologicals, either through replacement or integration in crop
Mhm.
management systems.
Well, another area, another marketplace for biological products is websites like Amazon. And you could put biological product in the search term and come up with uh, products that can be sold and are available. I would say that I believe a lot of promise for biologicals, for in particular on abiotic stress, or as well as for biotic stress for homeowners. Think about this. In counties or states where there are restrictions on fertilizer use because of
Mhm.
runoff into uh, water bodies, etc. Biologicals offer a nice opportunity to be able to provide an enhanced nutrient load for the lawn, for their ornamental crops. Another is if you think about abiotic stress tolerance, and in states or in areas where water is really at a premium. Another way to be able to help homeowners be able to maintain their lawns and gardens and the like. So I believe that there's a great deal of opportunity. And when you move that even beyond the homeowners to the professional market, golf courses and other landscapers, which are really under a lot of pressure as far as what they're using and how they manage their courses and their properties. Again, these really offer a nice opportunity. And I know companies are addressing that and working toward servicing that market.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Not to over personalize, but I live in a neighborhood that's probably built too close to a wetland.
Yeah,
But
right.
it's there. But one of the things that I'm reluctant to do is to put a lot of treatments in our yard and in our garden, because we get a lot of animals, a lot of frogs and other things,
Mhm.
and we kind of
Yep.
like having them around. But because we don't do a lot of treatment, then our garden is a disaster. It's attacked by every living thing in the world. And it having options at the consumer level for things that you can feel a little bit friendlier about using is definitely something that appeals to me. Not that I'm the average consumer, but certainly something that I think has potential for the future. So we're wrapping up. I'm really, I couldn't be more gratified. You know, it's my favorite part of my job to get people who are smart and experienced together and ask them questions about things in which they're smart and experienced. And this has been a really enjoyable session for me, and I hope for our participants as well. Before I wrap up, I just want to give everybody an opportunity to make a plug for their favorite source of information that they might direct our participants to if they're looking to find more information about biologicals, the biologicals industry, regulation of biologicals. Where would you tell them to go, other than, of course, to the Agriculture and Food Systems Institute website? Um, I can plug that, but where would you send people who are inspired by this discussion and want to learn more? And maybe I'll start with you, Terry, and then we'll go to Natasha, Jane, and Vika.
Well, I'd have to push the Biological Products Industry Alliance, www.bpia.org. It's a great starting off point to learn more about biologicals and get to other websites and information that is pertinent to the area.
I would second that, and I would add BIO, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization at www.bio.org, I believe is their website, and we can clarify that when we send these links out. Also, a good source, as well as CropLife International, has a whole section on their website, and I will give that to you, Andrew, to put in the chat as well, on biologics and risk assessments and considerations when looking at those products.
I know there were some questions in the chat around where to direct farmers and so forth. So, you know, some of the go-to places I go to, there's, you can find some good resources through University Extension. There are extension agents that I think are out there definitely talking about biostimulants, testing them, and trying to understand them. So, probably University of Illinois is one. There's other universities as well. So there's some good material there. I would say industry, you know, companies big and small. So for Natasha, Bayer has excellent resources out there on biologicals. And I would do some self-promotion for 3Bar Bio. We try to do content pieces as much as we can, find time to do them, and post some of our presentations where we're trying to use that material to educate and provide more information out there. So, you know, I try to tell farmers to go out there. There's some good resources around field trials to try to understand. I know the PFR program with Bex. They were one of the early organizations, companies out there that was looking at biologicals, and they put them into field trials. And there's some other companies as well. So just Google it, I guess. You'll find some resources. And industry does have a good bit out there that I think is relevant and not biased.
Well said.
Well said.
Well,
Mika, anything?
you know, the regulations, our website actually has a lot of information. It's just not
Mm,
really easy to navigate. So I would encourage you to use your favorite browser and put plus EPA at the end. We are actually in the process of revamping some of the biopesticide websites. We want to make it more user-friendly and put more information out there. So go on there periodically to find this. We have already a website dedicated to the Applied Incorporated Protectant exemptions, where there are webinars linked and the final rules and additional information. So that is out there. And then, of course, the unified website for biotechnology that has a link out to the GE microbes decision tree.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I can't tell you how gratifying this has been. It's certainly lived up to and exceeded my expectations for our panel discussion. We kept nicely on time. I learned a lot. I hope the participants did. We've had very nice attendance throughout. We didn't see a big drop off at any point, so that's always nice. I want to just take a moment to thank all of the participants for joining us. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Bhavneet Bajaj, who works with me at the Agriculture and Food Systems Institute. She doesn't like to be on the camera as much as I do, but this whole session is really motivated by her. She put in the application. She's managed our relationship with the DuPont Summit, who has been very gracious in allowing us to host this session. And you've seen her busily in the chat providing links and information. So thank you very much, Bhavneet, for organizing the session. And I will, without further ceremony, I will end the session. So thanks again, everybody. And we'll look forward to continuing these conversations next month in Washington, D.C.